What's the worst reaction to being cheated on you've seen? I was washing dishes when my girlfriend Audrey's phone lit up on the counter. Sienna was calling again. The screen went dark after 3 rings like it always did when Audrey ignored her. We'd been living together for a year in our tiny apartment near campus. Audrey was the type who planned everything down to the minute, but whenever Sienna called, she'd glance at her phone and let it ring out. Sometimes she'd flip it face down. Other times, she'd silence it mid-ring. At first, I figured Sienna was just an annoying friend from high school. Audrey never talked about her, and I never asked. But Sienna kept calling, 3 times a week. Always when Audrey was with me. Never when she was at class or work. Audrey's shoulders would tense up every time that name appeared on the screen. One Thursday night, we were studying together at the kitchen table. Her phone buzzed with another call from Sienna. This time, I watched Audrey's face carefully. She didn't just look annoyed, she looked guilty. "You can answer it if you want," I said. Audrey shook her head and flipped her phone over. "Just this girl from back home. She doesn't understand I'm busy with school." Her voice was higher than usual. When I got home early and found her phone charging on her nightstand, seeing the screen light up with a text from Sienna, "Please just talk to me. I know you're getting these." I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed a pen and wrote down Sienna's number on my hand. I called her a week later while Audrey was at her library shift until 9. My heart was pounding. "Hello?" A man's voice answered, deep and friendly. I almost hung up. I'd expected Sienna to be a girl. Hi. Is this Sienna's number?" The man laughed. "This is Corey." "Who's this?" "I'm trying to reach Sienna. She's been calling my girlfriend." There was a long pause. "What's your girlfriend's name?" His voice wasn't friendly anymore. "Audrey Quinn." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet and controlled. "Audrey Quinn is my girlfriend." The room started spinning. "That's not possible. We've been living together for a year." "Living together?" "Audrey lives at home with her parents. I see her every weekend when she comes home from state." My mind raced through all the weekends Audrey had gone home. "To see her parents," she said. "At least 1 weekend a month, sometimes 2. I've been with Audrey for 3 years," Corey continued. "Since junior year of high school. I have a promise ring she wears on a chain around her neck when she's at school. The necklace. The thin gold chain Audrey never took off. She said it was her grandmother's. She told me it was her grandmother's necklace. I saved for 6 months to buy that ring." We stayed on the phone comparing stories. Corey lived in Audrey's hometown 4 hours away. Audrey told him the dorms didn't allow overnight guests, so he couldn't visit. She told him she was living in the dorms. "She's there right now," Corey said. "Got home this morning for Thanksgiving break." I looked at the turkey defrosting in our fridge, the pie ingredients Audrey bought for our first Thanksgiving together. "She told me she wasn't going home this year. She told me you didn't exist." We hung up and I sat trying to make sense of it. She had 2 separate lives, college Audrey and hometown Audrey, and she'd kept them apart perfectly until I found that number. I heard her key in the lock at 9:15, right on schedule. "Hey babe, you eat yet?" I walked out holding the sticky note with Corey's number. "We need to talk." Audrey saw the paper and her face went white. "I can explain." "Can you? Because I just spent an hour on the phone with Corey." She sank onto our couch. Tears streamed down her face. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was going to break up with him freshman year. But then his dad got sick. And I met you and everything was perfect and I thought I could keep them separate until I figured out what to do. It's been a year, Audrey. I know. I had 2 calendars, 2 sets of stories, 2 different versions of me. Which one was real? Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." Audrey packed her things and left. I thought about calling Corey back, but that wasn't my place. They had their own story to finish. An hour later, my phone rang. Corey again. "She's gone. They can't find the body." I sat frozen on the couch staring at my phone after Corey's words kept playing over and over in my head. "They can't find the body." My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the phone steady enough to dial. I called Audrey 3 times in a row, and each call went straight to voicemail like her phone was off or dead. The automated voice felt like a punch to the stomach every time it kicked in. I hung up and tried again even though I knew it wouldn't work. My thumb hovered over the call button for a 4th try, but I stopped myself because what was the point? If she wasn't answering Corey and she wasn't answering me, then she didn't want to be found. I opened my messages and started typing with shaking fingers. The words came out in a rush, asking if she was okay and begging her to just call me back, so I'd know she was safe. I hit send and watched the message turn from sending to delivered. At least her phone was still on somewhere. The messages showed delivered but not read, which meant she had her phone but wasn't looking at it. Or maybe she was looking and just choosing not to respond. I got up from the couch because sitting still felt impossible. My legs moved without me really deciding to move them, and I started pacing around our tiny apartment. Audrey's coffee mug sat on the counter from this morning with a little bit of cold coffee still in the bottom. Her jacket hung on the hook by the door. Her textbooks were stacked on the kitchen table where she'd left them before packing her stuff and walking out. Everything looked so normal, like she'd just stepped out for a minute and would be back any second. but she wasn't coming back, and looking at all her things just made my chest feel tight. I picked up her coffee mug and put it in the sink, then immediately felt stupid for doing that, like I was erasing evidence or something. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe Corey got bad information from whoever told him about the car by the river. Maybe it was all just small-town gossip that got out of hand. I wanted to believe that, but my phone buzzed in my hand, and Corey's name lit up the screen. I answered before the second ring. He didn't say hello or anything, just launched right into it. His voice sounded tight and controlled, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. He told me someone in his town reported seeing a car near the river where Audrey's parents live, and now people were spreading rumors about something bad happening. I asked him what kind of rumors, and he said he didn't know exactly because everyone was being vague, but the police were asking questions. My stomach dropped. Neither of us knew what to believe or if any of it was even connected to Audrey. We agreed to stay in contact and share anything we found out, even though talking to him felt wrong and uncomfortable. He was the guy my girlfriend had been lying to me about for a year, but he was also the only other person who understood what this felt like. I hung up and stood in the middle of the living room, trying to figure out what to do next. The apartment felt too quiet. I checked my phone again, but there were no new messages from Audrey. The delivered receipts just sat there mocking me. I tried calling her one more time and got voicemail again. This time I left a message asking her to please just let me know she was okay, even if she never wanted to talk to me again. My voice cracked a little at the end, and I hated how desperate I sounded, but I didn't care anymore. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Audrey's face when I confronted her with Corey's number. The way she went pale and sank onto the couch, the tears streaming down her face. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for a text or missed call, but there was nothing. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on trying to sleep and got out of bed. The apartment felt different in the dark and quiet. I walked to Audrey's desk in the corner of our bedroom and just stood there looking at it. Her laptop was closed. Her pens were organized in a little cup. Everything was neat and planned out, just like she always kept it. I felt guilty about going through her stuff, but I was desperate for any clue about where she might have gone. I opened the top drawer slowly, like she might somehow hear me and come back to yell at me for invading her privacy. Inside were notebooks and old assignments and a bunch of pens that had run out of ink, but she kept anyway. I moved things around carefully, looking for anything that might help. The second drawer had more of the same. The bottom drawer was mostly empty except for some old textbooks from freshman year. I pulled them out one by one, and that's when I saw it. A second planner tucked underneath everything else, like she'd hidden it there on purpose. My hands shook as I pulled it out and opened it. The pages were filled with Audrey's handwriting, but the entries were different from her regular planner. Weekends were marked with different colored pens, blue ink for some weekends, red ink for others, small codes I didn't recognize next to each date. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at. This was how she kept track of which life she was living each weekend. Blue must have been weekends with me here at the apartment. Red must have been weekends going home to see Corey. The codes probably meant something about what excuse she'd used or what story she'd told to who. I flipped back through months of entries. September had mostly blue weekends with a few red ones scattered in. October was more balanced. November had more red leading up to Thanksgiving. Every single weekend was accounted for in her careful handwriting. She'd planned every detail of keeping us separate right down to color coding her lies in a planner she kept hidden from both of us. Isaiah came home around 8 in the morning and found me still sitting on the bedroom floor surrounded by Audrey's stuff. I probably looked terrible because I hadn't slept and my eyes felt raw. He stood in the doorway for a second, just taking in the scene before asking if I was okay. I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out in a rush that probably didn't make much sense. I told him about calling the number and finding out about Corey, about Audrey leaving last night, about the call from Corey saying they couldn't find the body and now all these rumors, about finding the hidden planner with the color-coded weekends. Isaiah listened without interrupting or judging, which I was grateful for because I felt crazy enough already. When I finally stopped talking, he just nodded and said he'd make coffee. I followed him to the kitchen and sat at the table while he filled the pot with water and measured out grounds. The normal routine of it felt steadying somehow. He asked questions while the coffee brewed. Had I heard from Audrey at all? Had I tried calling her parents? Had I contacted the police yet? I answered no to all of them, and he nodded again like he was thinking through options. The coffee finished and he poured us both cups, then sat across from me. He suggested we call the police to file a missing person report since Audrey left upset, and now no one could reach her. I hesitated because part of me thought she just needed space and I'd look crazy calling the cops over a breakup. But the part about Corey saying they couldn't find a body kept nagging at me. What if something really was wrong? What if she was in danger and I did nothing because I was worried about looking stupid? Isaiah pushed his phone across the table toward me and said we should at least call the non-emergency line to ask what our options were. I picked up the phone and dialed. The police operator who answered sounded bored. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. My girlfriend left last night after an argument. She won't answer calls or texts. Her other boyfriend in another town said there are rumors about something bad happening. The operator asked how long she'd been gone, and I said since last night around 9:45. There was a pause, and then she explained that Audrey was an adult who left on her own after an argument. Unless there was evidence of danger or foul play, they couldn't force someone to come home or answer their phone. I tried to explain about the rumors and the car by the river, but she cut me off saying that sounded like hearsay from another jurisdiction. She suggested I wait 24 hours, and if Audrey still hadn't made contact, I could file an official report. I hung up feeling frustrated and helpless. Isaiah looked at me with sympathy and said at least we tried. The system didn't seem to care that something felt really wrong about this whole situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Corey asking if I'd heard anything. I texted back that I hadn't and asked if he had any updates. He replied right away saying he'd filed a report in his hometown too. He sent a screenshot of some social media post about the car near the river. The post was vague and full of speculation. Someone saw a car. Someone else heard sirens. Nobody seemed to actually know anything concrete. Corey admitted he didn't even know if it was connected to Audrey, but we were both grasping at anything that might explain where she went and if she was safe. I showed Isaiah the screenshot and he frowned at it. He pointed out that small-town rumors could spiral out of control fast, and this might be nothing, but it also might be something. We just didn't know. I went back to Audrey's desk and kept looking through her things. The hidden planner sat on top of everything else now. I opened it again and studied the coded entries more carefully. The patterns started making sense the longer I looked at them. Blue weekends were always marked with an H, which probably meant home, meaning here at the apartment with me. Red weekends were marked with a C, which obviously meant Corey. Some weekends had dollar amounts written in tiny numbers in the margins. I pointed this out to Isaiah when he came to check on me. We realized these might be the amounts of cash she withdrew before each trip. She was taking money out so there wouldn't be electronic records of where she spent it. The level of planning made me feel sick to my stomach. This wasn't just something that got out of hand like she'd claimed last night. She actively worked to deceive both of us. She had systems in place, color codes and cash withdrawals and careful scheduling. Every detail was thought through and executed perfectly until I found Corey's number. I counted back through the months of entries, September through November. 12 weekends marked in blue, 8 weekends marked in red, 20 weekends of living two completely separate lives and keeping them from colliding. The coded entries matched up perfectly with when she told me she was visiting her parents. Weekend of September 15th marked in red with a C and a note that said, family dinner. That was the weekend she said her mom wasn't feeling well and she needed to go home to help out. Weekend of October 6th marked in red with a C and $80 in the margin. She told me her dad's birthday was that weekend. I remembered because I'd asked if I should come meet her parents, and she said they were keeping it small family only. Every lie was documented right here in her handwriting. She planned every detail of keeping us separate right down to color, coding her deceptions in a planner she kept hidden from me under old textbooks in the bottom drawer of her desk, where she thought I'd never look. Isaiah leaned closer to the planner and ran his finger down the margin of one red-coded weekend. Tiny numbers appeared in pencil next to several entries, 200 on one weekend, 150 on another, 300 next to a weekend in October. I grabbed my phone and opened our joint bank account app. The withdrawals matched perfectly. September 23rd, $200 cash at the ATM near campus. October 7th, $150 from the branch downtown. She took out money before every trip home so there wouldn't be electronic records of where she spent it. Isaiah shook his head and closed the planner. The apartment buzzer rang and I jumped. Neil's voice came through asking if now was okay to check the bathroom sink I'd reported leaking last week. I buzzed him up and tried to wipe my face and look normal. Neil took one look at me when I opened the door and asked if everything was all right. I ended up telling him the basics while he worked on the sink. My girlfriend left last night after I found out she had another boyfriend. Now nobody can reach her and I'm going through her stuff trying to figure out where she went. Neil dried his hands and mentioned the building has security cameras in the lobby. He could pull footage from last night if it would help me see when she left or if she took anything specific with her. I thanked him and said that would be really helpful. My phone buzzed with a text from Corey, just a photo with no caption. I opened it and felt my chest get tight. Audrey smiled at the camera wearing a sweater I'd never seen. The necklace hung around her neck with the promise ring clearly visible against her collarbone. The photo info said it was taken 2 weeks ago. That was the weekend she told me her mom needed help with some family thing. She was wearing his ring and smiling at whoever took the picture, probably Corey himself. She lived a completely different life with him on those weekends. Told him she loved him probably. Made plans for their future together. Everything she did with me, she was doing with him too. My phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice introduced herself as Detective Maya Castaneda. She explained she was following up on my report, and also a report filed by someone named Corey in another town. Her voice sounded professional, but not cold. She asked if now was a good time to talk about my last conversation with Audrey. I said yes, and she started asking detailed questions. What exactly did Audrey say when she left? Did she seem upset or scared or angry? Does she have any history of mental health issues or self-harm that I know about? I answered everything as honestly as I could. Detective Castaneda took notes and made little sounds like she was writing things down. I told her everything about discovering Corey and the double life situation. She didn't sound shocked at all. Just asked clarifying questions about timelines and when I last saw Audrey and what she took with her. She explained that the context of our argument combined with her sudden disappearance and the rumors from Corey's town did warrant opening a missing person inquiry. She wanted to check on Audrey's welfare and make sure she was safe. I felt some relief that someone official was taking this seriously. My phone buzzed with a text while I was still on the call with the detective. Chloe from the library asking if Audrey was okay because she missed her shift this morning without calling. I told Detective Castaneda about the text, and she asked me to forward her Chloe's contact information. After we hung up, I texted Chloe back explaining that Audrey left last night and nobody had heard from her since. Chloe responded right away saying Audrey seemed really stressed the past few weeks, but wouldn't talk about what was bothering her. Neil knocked on my door again an hour later holding printed screenshots. The lobby security footage showed Audrey walking out at 9:45 last night. She carried just a small backpack over one shoulder. Her face looked calm in the grainy black and white image, not panicked or crying or upset, just walking normally like she was going to class. She got into a rideshare vehicle that pulled up right outside. Neil had printed several frames showing her leaving the building and getting in the car. The fact that she only took a backpack made me think she planned to come back, or at least didn't plan to disappear forever. All her clothes and books and laptop were still here. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through our shared apps and accounts. The bank account showed a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Cash withdrawals before each hometown trip, usually $200 or $300 at a time, always from different ATMs around campus. She was taking money systematically in a way that wouldn't trigger any alerts or make me ask questions. The rideshare app showed the trip from last night to the bus station downtown. I checked our shared calendar and saw all the family weekends she'd marked. All the lies documented right there in digital records I had access to the whole time. My phone rang again. Corey this time. We had a long, uncomfortable conversation comparing notes about Audrey's behavior. He admitted he always accepted her excuse about dorm rules not allowing visitors because he didn't want to seem pushy. He thought if he gave her space and trusted her, she'd eventually invite him to visit. I realized I did the exact same thing with her weekend trips. Never questioned too deeply because I didn't want to seem insecure or controlling. We both enabled her deception by being too trusting and too willing to accept her explanations. Detective Castaneda called back in the late afternoon. She asked if she could come by the apartment to look at Audrey's laptop and personal items. I agreed, even though it felt weird letting a stranger go through Audrey's private stuff. Isaiah offered to stay with me during the visit. The detective arrived 20 minutes later with a young officer who took photos while Castaneda asked more questions. She carefully photographed Audrey's desk area and the hidden planner with all the coded entries. She asked if she could take the laptop as potential evidence if this became a more serious investigation. I signed a form giving permission and watched her bag the laptop in a clear plastic evidence bag. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else instead of living through it myself. After the detective left, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook and started writing down everything I knew about Audrey's daily routines. Tuesday afternoons at the coffee shop on 3rd Street, always at the same table near the window. Wednesday mornings, she'd get up early to jog around campus before her 8 o'clock class. The necklace never came off, not even in the shower. Thursday nights, we'd cook dinner together and she'd insist on doing dishes while I dried. I filled 3 pages with these tiny details about how she moved through her days. The list felt wrong somehow because I could describe her entire weekly schedule down to the minute, but I had no idea what she was actually thinking or planning during any of it. I texted the list to Detective Castaneda and sat staring at my phone feeling hollow. My phone rang 20 minutes later with Corey's name on the screen. When I answered, he said he had Francesca on the line too and wanted to conference us all in. Francesca's voice came through explaining she was one of Corey's friends from high school who'd known Audrey for years. She mentioned something that made Corey go quiet. Audrey had stopped showing up to Sunday family dinners about 2 months ago. She'd always been regular about those dinners at Corey's parents' house, but suddenly started making excuses about big projects or feeling sick. Corey sounded confused, saying Audrey never told him she stopped going. I realized she was pulling away from both our lives even before everything exploded. The pattern was there if we'd been paying attention. Chloe texted me an hour later saying she remembered something weird. A few weeks back, Audrey asked her questions about temporary phone plans and prepaid carriers that had kiosks near campus. At the time, Chloe figured maybe Audrey was helping out a friend who needed a cheap phone option. Now it seemed like Audrey was researching how to set up communication that couldn't be traced back to her regular accounts. I forwarded Chloe's text to Detective Castaneda and added it to my mental file of evidence showing this wasn't impulsive. Detective Castaneda called back that evening with news that made my hands shake. Audrey's bank card hadn't been used since yesterday, but there was a record of a small cash transaction at the downtown bus station that matched the timing of when she left. The amount looked like it could be a ticket purchase. The detective said she was working with the bus station to pull security footage and confirm whether it was actually Audrey making the purchase. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like the walls were closing in. Neil knocked on my door the next morning holding his maintenance clipboard. He mentioned he saw a rideshare vehicle picking someone up outside our building the night Audrey left. He remembered it specifically because the driver had a bright green company sticker on the windshield that reflected weird in the streetlight. I rushed to grab the shared iPad we kept in the living room, where Audrey's email sometimes autofilled when she used it. I scrolled through her inbox until I found a receipt from a rideshare company. 9:53 last night. Pick up at our address. Drop off at the bus station downtown. I took a screenshot and sent it to Detective Castaneda immediately. I opened the rideshare app on my phone and found the trip in our account history. The app had a feature to contact your previous driver through their messaging system. I sent a message asking if they remembered anything about the passenger from that trip last night. After a few back-and-forth messages and some verification with Detective Castaneda to make it official, the driver confirmed picking up a woman who matched Audrey's description perfectly. The driver remembered because the passenger specifically asked about the bus station's cash ticket kiosk and which entrance it was closest to. That detail made everything clear. Audrey left on purpose, and she wanted to buy her ticket with cash, so there wouldn't be an electronic record of where she went. My phone buzzed with a text from Corey in the afternoon. He drove out to the river spot where the rumor started about someone seeing a car. He tracked down the person who made the original report and talked to them directly. Turned out the incident they saw was from weeks ago and had nothing to do with Audrey at all. The rumor got twisted as it spread through his small town where everyone knew everyone's business. Corey texted that he felt terrible for panicking me with that "can't find the body" comment when he first called. The rumor was completely unrelated to Audrey's disappearance. I felt this strange mix of emotions sitting on my couch reading Corey's text. Relief that there was no actual evidence of harm or violence, but also anger that Audrey chose to just vanish instead of facing the mess she created for both of us. Detective Castaneda called later that day, and I told her about my feelings. She explained this was actually pretty common in cases where someone felt trapped by their circumstances. Sometimes people saw disappearing as easier than dealing with consequences and hard conversations. Her explanation didn't make me feel better, but at least it made some logical sense, even if it sucked. The detective mentioned something else during that call. Her tech team found a scheduled email draft on Audrey's laptop that was set to send automatically, but never went through because of some technical error with the scheduling. She was working with the tech people to recover the full draft and see if it had any information about Audrey's plans or state of mind when she wrote it. I felt nervous about what the email might say, but also desperate for any kind of explanation directly from Audrey about why she did this. I couldn't just sit in the apartment waiting anymore, so I grabbed my phone and headed downtown to the bus station. The place was busy and impersonal with people rushing everywhere. Security cameras hung from the ceiling in every corner. The ticket windows sat behind thick protective glass that made everyone look distorted. I walked up to different employees showing them a recent photo of Audrey on my phone. Most of them barely looked at the picture before shrugging or shaking their heads. One woman said she saw hundreds of faces every day, and they all blurred together. Another guy didn't even glance at my phone before saying he couldn't help. I kept moving through the station asking anyone who worked there if they recognized her face. The next clerk I approached actually looked at the photo carefully instead of just glancing. He studied it for a few seconds before nodding slowly. His name tag said Brad. He told me he remembered her from yesterday because she paid with cash instead of a card like most people do. Brad said she asked him specific questions about which bus routes had the most transfer options. She wanted to know which destinations went to bigger cities where someone could blend in easily. He remembered the necklace she wore because it caught the light when she leaned forward to look at the route maps. Everything he described matched Audrey perfectly. I thanked him and walked outside to call Detective Castaneda with this new information. Before I could dial, my phone rang with Corey's name on the screen. Corey sounded different this time. His voice was shaky and guilty. He said he needed to tell me something he should have mentioned earlier. 2 weeks before Audrey disappeared, he gave her an ultimatum about their relationship. He told her she needed to stop making excuses about him not being allowed to visit campus. He said either she let him come see her at the school or he was done with the relationship completely. Audrey cried on the phone and promised they would figure everything out soon. She begged him to be patient just a little longer. Obviously, she never planned to follow through with any of it. Corey said he felt terrible now because maybe his ultimatum pushed her to run instead of dealing with the situation. I told him it wasn't his fault, but I understood why he felt bad about it. After hanging up with Corey, a memory hit me hard. A few weeks ago, I came home early and found Audrey sitting at the kitchen table practicing something in a notebook. When she saw me, she quickly closed it and laughed. She said she was just doodling and messing around with different handwriting styles. I didn't think much about it at the time. Now I wondered if she was practicing a signature that wasn't her usual one. Maybe she was preparing to use a different name wherever she planned to go. The memory made me feel cold inside because it meant she was planning this exit for way longer than I realized. She wasn't making impulsive decisions in the moment. She was carefully preparing to disappear. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. She said she remembered something else that seemed important now. A few weeks back, Audrey asked her about mail holds and forwarding services at the post office. Chloe works part-time at the campus mail center, so Audrey framed it like she was just asking general questions out of curiosity. Chloe explained how someone could put a hold on their mail or set up forwarding to a new address without much paperwork. At the time, it seemed like random conversation. Now it was obvious Audrey was researching how to disappear without leaving traces that could be easily followed. Each new detail made the picture clearer. This wasn't some emotional breakdown or sudden crisis. Audrey spent weeks or maybe months planning her exit strategy. Detective Castaneda called me that afternoon. She had something to share that she knew would be hard to hear. The promise ring that Audrey wore on the chain around her neck was found. Someone discovered it left on a shelf in the mailroom at her hometown campus, where she had access during her weekend visits. Audrey deliberately left it behind instead of taking it with her or leaving it somewhere more personal. I had to call Corey and tell him about this. When I did, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said it felt like she was shedding that identity completely. She left the ring behind like she was leaving the version of herself who wore it. It wasn't lost or forgotten. She chose to abandon it as part of disappearing from both our lives. Corey called me back an hour later after talking to Francesca. She told him she saw Audrey a few weeks ago when Audrey came home for a weekend visit. Francesca noticed Audrey had cut her hair way shorter than usual. At the time, it just seemed like a new style choice. Francesca even complimented it, and Audrey smiled and said she wanted a change. Combined with everything else we now knew, the haircut looked like Audrey changing her appearance on purpose. She was altering how she looked as part of planning to disappear. Each new detail from different people in our lives made it clearer this wasn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of the moment. Neil stopped by my apartment that evening to check on me. While we talked, he suddenly remembered something odd from a few weeks back. A package arrived at our building addressed to someone with a different first name, but our apartment number. Neil brought it up and Audrey answered the door. She looked at the package and joked about how that could be her undercover name if she ever needed to disappear. Neil laughed and figured it was just a delivery mistake. Audrey took the package and said she would handle returning it. I thought back to that day and realized I never saw that package again. At the time, her comment seemed like a random joke. Now it seemed like she was testing the idea out loud, maybe even seeing how it felt to say those words. Corey and I ended up on a really long phone call that night. We decided to create a shared document for Detective Castaneda with everything we each knew. We added all of Audrey's movements, behavior changes, and weird comments over the past few months. I typed in the things I remembered from our life together. Corey added details from her weekends at home. We compared dates and found patterns we hadn't noticed before. Working together felt strange since we were basically rivals in this whole mess. But we were both invested in understanding what actually happened, even if we couldn't fix it or bring her back. The timeline we built showed clear evidence of planning over at least 2 months. The next morning, Corey got a call from a bank fraud investigator. There was unusual activity flagged on his account related to the promise ring purchase from months ago. The investigator needed Corey to verify the date he bought it and the exact amount he spent. It was just routine verification for their fraud prevention system, but having to confirm those details brought back all the memories of how hard Corey saved for that ring. He worked extra shifts for 6 months to afford it. He told me later that the call made him face how much he sacrificed for someone who was already planning to leave him behind. The investigator had no idea the emotional weight behind those simple verification questions. Detective Castaneda called both of us separately with an update late that afternoon. Based on all the evidence we provided and what her team found, she was classifying this as a likely voluntary missing adult case. Audrey appeared to have left intentionally with careful planning. There was no evidence of foul play or any danger to her safety. The case would stay open in the system and flagged for any new information. But active investigation resources were limited for adults who choose to disappear on their own. She explained this happens more often than people realize. Some people feel so trapped by their circumstances that vanishing seems like the only option. The detective's words were both relieving and incredibly frustrating at the same time. Back in my apartment, I started going through Audrey's desk drawers more carefully than I had before. Under a stack of old notebooks and loose papers, I found a half-written letter in her handwriting that she never finished or sent. The paper was crumpled like she'd thrown it away and then pulled it back out. I smoothed it flat on the desk and read her words about feeling like she became 2 completely different people and failed at being either one. She wrote about the weight of maintaining the lies and how she didn't know how to untangle everything without destroying people she cared about. The letter just stopped mid-sentence like she gave up trying to explain herself, even to a piece of paper that no one would read. I folded it carefully and put it in the same folder as the planner with the coded weekends. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. She was kind but firm in her message, asking me to stop coming by the library looking for updates or information about Audrey. She explained it was affecting her work, and she didn't know anything more than what she'd already shared. I felt embarrassed reading it because I hadn't realized how much I'd been bothering her. She was right to protect herself from being pulled into this mess. I texted back apologizing and promised I wouldn't show up at the library again. She sent a simple thanks, and that was the end of our communication about Audrey. Corey called me that evening sounding hurt and angry. He'd driven to Audrey's parents' house to try talking to them directly about where she might have gone. They refused to speak with him beyond saying they hadn't heard from her and closing the door in his face. He stood on their porch for a few minutes hoping they'd reconsider, but they never came back out. The rejection clearly stung him more than he wanted to admit. He kept saying how they used to invite him for dinner and treated him like family, Now they acted like he was a stranger who had no right to ask questions. I understood his frustration, but I also wondered if Audrey's parents were dealing with their own complicated feelings about their daughter's choices. Detective Castaneda called the next afternoon with an update that made my stomach flip. The technical team recovered Audrey's scheduled email and would be releasing it according to legal guidelines. The email was set to send 3 days after she left, which suggested she wanted time to get wherever she was going before anyone read her explanation. I felt anxious and hopeful at the same time that the email would provide some closure. The detective said it would arrive in my inbox within the next 24 hours. She reminded me to prepare myself because Audrey's words might be difficult to read regardless of what they said. The email showed up the next afternoon while I was sitting in my apartment trying to focus on homework. I saw it come through in both my personal inbox, and Corey texted me at the same moment saying he got it too. My hands shook as I opened it and started reading Audrey's words. She apologized without giving away her location and admitted that Sienna was a contact alias she used to hide Corey's calls when she was with me. She wrote that she needed to create one life with no witnesses and couldn't figure out how to do that without disappearing from both of us completely. The email was short and didn't explain where she went or what her plans were. She just said she was sorry for the pain she caused and hoped we could both move forward. Reading her words felt hollow because an apology through a scheduled email wasn't the same as facing what she did. I read it 3 times trying to find something between the lines that would make it make sense, but there was nothing there. Corey called me less than an hour after we both read the email. We ended up arguing over the phone about who really knew Audrey and whose relationship was more real. The fight got heated with both of us saying things we probably didn't mean. He insisted his 3-year relationship meant more than my 1 year. I shot back that at least I lived with her every day and knew her actual daily life. We went back and forth until we both ran out of energy because we were exhausted from days of stress and confusion. Finally, Corey said he couldn't do this anymore, and I agreed. We decided to stop digging into this every single day because it was consuming our lives and we weren't getting anywhere. The conversation ended with an agreement to only contact each other if something major came up. Detective Castaneda called to check on me a few hours later. She asked how I was doing after reading the email, and I admitted I didn't know what to feel. She gently suggested I focus on taking care of myself and reminded me the case was still flagged in the system if any new information came up. Her advice felt like permission to stop obsessing over finding answers that might never come. She said sometimes people just need to walk away from their old lives, and that's what Audrey seemed to have done. The detective's tone was kind but realistic. She'd probably seen cases like this before where adults vanished intentionally and never came back. I spent an entire afternoon packing up Audrey's remaining belongings from the apartment. Isaiah came over to help me box everything carefully so nothing would get damaged. We wrapped her picture frames in newspaper and folded her clothes into neat stacks. I decided to keep the planner with the coded weekends as evidence in case Audrey ever contacted me again. Everything else went into boxes that I labeled and stacked in the closet. Isaiah didn't ask many questions while we worked. He just helped me tape boxes and carried the heavier items. Letting go of her physical presence in the apartment felt necessary but painful. Each item I packed was a reminder of how much of our shared life was built on lies. By the time we finished, the apartment looked emptier but also cleaner somehow. Corey texted me later that week saying he went to Audrey's hometown campus and retrieved the promise ring from the mailroom through an official chain of custody process. He told me he wasn't going to put it back on the chain or wear it himself. He was keeping it in the box it came in as a reminder, but not as something active in his life anymore. I understood what he meant. The ring represented something that never actually existed the way he thought it did. Throwing it away seemed too dramatic, but keeping it visible would hurt too much. The box in a drawer was a middle ground. Neil stopped by my apartment a few days later to help me sort out the lease situation since Audrey's name was on it, but she was gone. We worked out an arrangement where I could move to a smaller, cheaper single room in another building next month. The new place would cost less, and I wouldn't have to deal with memories of Audrey in every corner. Neil handled all the paperwork and transfer fees. The practical details of untangling our shared life felt manageable compared to the emotional mess. I was grateful for concrete tasks that had clear solutions and definite endpoints. A few days later, Chloe texted asking if she could stop by with some of Audrey's things from the library. She showed up that afternoon carrying a cardboard box with the library logo on the side. I opened the door and she handed it to me without coming inside. The box was heavier than I expected. I set it on the kitchen counter and pulled back the flaps. Inside were pens and highlighters, a water bottle with Audrey's name written on masking tape, and a stack of sticky notes. Buried under the work supplies was a notebook with a plain black cover. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. Every single page was blank, not a single word or mark anywhere. I turned it over looking for any sign Audrey had used it, but there was nothing. The notebook felt brand new, like she'd just bought it and never opened it. I wondered if she'd planned to use it for something specific or if it was just random. Either way, it felt like it meant something, even though I couldn't figure out what. I thanked Chloe through a text and put the box in the closet with the other stuff. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of me. I started writing a letter to Audrey that I had no plans to actually send. My pen moved across the page as I explained what I would need if she ever came back or tried to contact me. I wrote about needing complete honesty about where she'd been and why she left. I wrote about needing real accountability for the harm she caused to me and Corey. I wrote about needing to know the truth about which parts of our relationship were real and which were just part of her act. The letter filled 3 pages front and back. Writing it all down made me feel like I had some control over the situation, even though I knew she might never read these words. I folded the pages and put them in an envelope without sealing it. The envelope went in my desk drawer next to the planner with the coded weekends. Corey called me a few days after that, sounding less stressed than usual. He told me Francesca had talked to their friend group about Audrey. They all agreed to stop posting about her on social media and to stop spreading information around town. Francesca explained to them that all the public talk wasn't helping anyone find Audrey. She also pointed out it might make things harder if Audrey ever wanted to reach out, because she'd know everyone was watching and judging. Corey appreciated their decision to back off. He told me he was going to follow their lead and stop checking social media for any sign of her. I agreed it made sense to give Audrey space if she needed it. We both knew the constant searching and posting wasn't bringing us any closer to answers. Detective Castaneda called the following week with an official update. She explained she was closing the active search portion of Audrey's case. Her voice stayed professional, as she clarified the case would remain open as a voluntary missing person file. She said this meant if Audrey showed up somewhere, or if new information came in, the case could be opened back up quickly. The formal closure felt like an ending even though nothing was actually resolved. I asked if this meant they were giving up, and she said no, she just didn't have resources to keep actively investigating an adult who appeared to have left by choice. There was no evidence of danger or crime. I thanked her for everything she'd done and hung up feeling empty. Isaiah found me sitting on the couch staring at nothing that evening. He sat down next to me and asked how I was really doing. I gave him some vague answer about being fine. He didn't buy it. He suggested I should talk to someone professional about everything I'd been through. I started to brush him off, but he kept pushing gently. He reminded me the campus health center had counselors and it wouldn't cost anything. I finally agreed to make an appointment just to get him to stop worrying. The next day, I called and scheduled a session with a counselor named Quentin for later that week. When the appointment day came, I almost canceled. I showed up anyway and sat in the waiting room feeling awkward. Quentin called me back to his office and I didn't know what to say at first. He asked open questions and waited patiently while I stumbled through trying to explain the situation. He didn't seem shocked or judgmental. He just listened and asked follow-up questions that helped me start unpacking my trust issues. By the end of the session, I felt a tiny bit lighter, even though we'd barely scratched the surface of everything. Corey sent me a text message that same week about the promise ring. He wrote that he'd given the ring box to Francesca to keep at her place. She'd suggested he shouldn't destroy it in anger, but also shouldn't have it sitting around his apartment where he'd see it every day. He thought it was a smart compromise. I agreed with him through a text. It showed he was trying to move forward without being too dramatic about the pain. The ring represented something that never existed the way he thought it did. Throwing it away seemed too extreme, but keeping it visible would hurt. Storing it at Francesca's house was a good middle ground. I went to the grocery store a few days later to return the Thanksgiving turkey and pie ingredients. I'd kept the receipt in my wallet this whole time. The customer service person scanned everything and processed the return without asking questions. The refund came to $30. It was a small amount, but somehow getting that money back made me feel slightly better. At least one tiny thing got resolved, even if all the big things stayed messy. I used the $30 to buy groceries for actual meals instead of the holiday dinner that never happened. Walking out of the store with the refund receipt felt like a small victory. Neil stopped by my apartment the next afternoon with his toolbox. I'd asked him earlier in the week about changing the lock on my door. He pulled out the old lock mechanism and installed a new one while I watched. He handed me 2 keys when he finished. I specifically told him not to make a spare key for Audrey, even though her name was technically still on the lease for another few weeks. Neil nodded and said he understood. Setting that physical boundary felt important for my sense of safety and control over my space. The new lock meant Audrey couldn't just walk in whenever she wanted. She'd made her choice to leave. This was my apartment now. Chloe surprised me by texting a few days later, asking if I wanted to get coffee. She made it clear she didn't want to talk about Audrey. She just wanted to check in on how I was doing as a person. We met at a coffee shop across town that neither of us had been to with Audrey. We sat at a small table by the window and kept the conversation on normal topics. She told me about her classes and weekend plans. I talked about possibly getting a cat with Isaiah once I moved to the new apartment. We laughed about stupid things our professors said. The whole conversation felt refreshingly normal. Nobody mentioned investigations or missing persons or complicated relationship drama. It was just 2 people having coffee and talking about regular life. Walking back to my car afterward, I realized how good it felt to have a social interaction that wasn't heavy with the weight of everything that happened. Detective Castaneda sent me an email the following week with a brief update. She forwarded a tip that had come through the system about someone matching Audrey's description, spotted in a city 3 states away. The email made it clear the tip was not confirmed and might not even be Audrey. She just wanted me to know the case was still being watched, even though active search had closed. I read the email 3 times, feeling a quick surge of hope. Maybe someone really had seen her. Maybe she was okay. Then the familiar feeling of resignation settled back in. I might never know for sure if that tip was real or if Audrey was actually in that city. The uncertainty was something I was slowly learning to live with, even though it still hurt. I opened my phone contacts and scrolled to Audrey's name. My finger hovered over the delete button for a full minute before I pressed it. The contact disappeared from my phone, but I kept the scheduled email she sent and the unfinished letter in a folder on my computer labeled, "For later." I wasn't ready to completely erase her from my life. Deleting her number meant I couldn't obsessively check if she'd called or texted anymore. That felt like a reasonable middle ground between holding on and letting go. Corey sent me a text the next day saying he blocked Audrey on all his social media accounts. He wrote that he couldn't stop himself from checking her profiles multiple times a day to see if she posted anything. He moved the ring box to his closet where he wouldn't see it every time he walked past his dresser. We were both trying to find ways to move forward that acknowledged the pain without letting it eat us alive. My first real therapy session with Quentin happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in his small office on campus and tried to explain how I felt stupid for not seeing the signs earlier. Quentin asked me specific questions about moments when I noticed something odd, but chose to ignore it. We talked about the difference between being a trusting person and being willfully blind to problems. He helped me see that wanting to trust someone you love isn't the same as ignoring red flags on purpose. The work was hard and uncomfortable, but I started feeling less stuck in the same thoughts on repeat. So Isaiah came home one weekend and found me staring at the living room like I was trying to solve a puzzle. He asked what I was thinking about, and I told him the apartment still felt like a shrine to a relationship that never really existed the way I thought it did. We spent the afternoon rearranging furniture and moving the couch to a different wall. I took down all the photos of Audrey and me that were hanging in frames. Isaiah didn't ask what I wanted to do with them. He just put them in a box and stored it in the hall closet without making a big deal about it. The apartment started feeling like mine again instead of a crime scene I was living in. Corey and I still talked, but the frequency dropped from daily calls to maybe once a week. When we did talk, the conversations were shorter and less intense. We'd check in about whether either of us heard anything new, and then move on to regular life stuff. He told me about his classes, and I told him about my plans for moving apartments. The shared trauma of Audrey's disappearance was becoming less central to who we were as individual people. We were both building separate lives again. Some friends from my biology class invited me to see a movie on a Friday night. I almost said no out of habit, but forced myself to agree. We saw some action movie that was loud and stupid in a good way. Afterward, we got late-night food at a diner, and I laughed at their dumb jokes about our professor. On the drive home, I suddenly realized I'd gone almost 3 hours without checking my phone or thinking about where Audrey might be. That felt like a small victory. My next session with Quentin focused on my anger at Audrey's parents for refusing to talk to Corey or help with any information. I told him it felt unfair that they could just shut the door in his face when they might actually know something. Quentin asked me to consider that they were probably dealing with their own complicated feelings about their daughter's choices. He suggested they might not actually know where she is either, and could be just as confused and hurt as we were. Understanding their perspective didn't make the situation hurt less, but it helped me let go of expecting anything from them. I started looking at the course catalog for next semester, and actually got excited about some of the classes. Isaiah and I talked seriously about maybe getting a cat once I moved into the new apartment. Having concrete future plans that didn't involve Audrey or the investigation made me feel like I was finally moving forward instead of being frozen in crisis mode. I filled out the housing paperwork and paid the deposit for the new place. 3 months after Audrey left, I was doing okay most days. I still thought about her and wondered where she was, but it didn't consume every waking moment like it did at first. I learned to live with not having all the answers and to focus on building a life that felt honest and real. Corey texted occasionally with updates that usually amounted to nothing new. We both accepted that closure might mean just deciding to close this chapter ourselves, rather than waiting for Audrey to give us permission. I started dating someone new who I met through friends. She knew the whole story about Audrey, and we agreed to take things slow and honest. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that felt like enough for now. That's my version of the story, but I already know you'll see it differently. And that's the fun part. Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's see who had the wildest take. I'll be checking through them later.